Hello, listeners. I dug up another episode from the archives, this time a recording with Jeff Sutherland. The recording took place in January 2011, days before the Agile Manifesto had its 10-year anniversary. Jeff and I sat down and recorded this episode after we co-delivered a training course that day in New York City. What is fascinating about Jeff in this episode is that many topics he touched on are still very much relevant today. If you enjoy Agile.FM, please take a moment and give the podcast a quick rating on iTunes. It doesn't even take a minute and makes a difference for me, the podcast, and future listeners who are out there trying to find interesting Agile content. If you like to go the extra mile and provide a short comment, that would be even more appreciated. If you would like to join the Agile.FM newsletter, please subscribe to the newsletter at Agile.FM. Thanks a ton, and now let's go to the show. Agile.FM, radio for the Agile community. www.agile.fm. I'm here with Jeff Sutherland. Welcome, Jeff.
Glad to be here.
Well, we're just at the end of the first day of a Scrum training course you're delivering in New York, and we're on our way to Agile New York City, just before you're going to talk about Agile in the enterprise.
Yeah, it was a pretty exciting day because there were so many questions in this class, I didn't get a spare second to even drink a glass of water. So people are pretty interested and pretty focused.
New Yorkers keep you busy.
Yeah.
But that was the first day, and tonight you're going to speak actually at Agile New York City. We just talked briefly before this podcast that you just delivered this talk in Japan.
Yes, I was on the panel. I was on the stage with Ikejiro Nonaka, who wrote the original paper that inspired Scrum, and he gave a talk, I gave a talk, and then we were a panel. Mm-hmm. And the Japanese seemed to like what I said, so that's what I'm going to be talking about tonight. We'll see if the New Yorkers like it.
Well, we'll see probably the feedback then on Agile New York City, and I'm sure everybody's going to be excited, as everybody was in the course today. Jeff, what I wanted to talk about, it's, what is it, 20th of January, actually, and it's almost February 2011, 10 years ago.
That's right.
Something major happened.
And there's actually a kind of a reunion. All the same people aren't going to be there, but on the same date, we're going to be at Snowboard again with a lot of the key people that wrote the original manifesto, plus a group of 10 or 15 other people who are special invitees, who are experts. We'll see what happens.
Okay. Do you think there will be Agile Manifesto 2.0?
Most of the people that I've talked to that worked on the manifesto in 2001 feel that it should not be changed, that it has the basic stuff in the manifesto, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done to implement it. Mm-hmm. You know, the thing we talked about all day today was the second principle of the Agile Manifesto. How do you get working software at the end of a sprint? Until you can do that, you can't get the full benefits. And over half the Scrum teams in the world aren't there yet, so we got a lot of work to do.
Yeah, don't want to get very nostalgic here, but 2001, what was your feeling in 10 years ago when you guys gathered there? Was it more like, let's meet and talk, and all of a sudden you guys, resulted into an Agile Manifesto? Or how does this happen?
It was let's meet and talk. There's a lot going on. At the time, Rational was really marketing RUP. RUP was becoming more and more heavyweight as it was being marketed. Grady Booch was actually invited to the meeting. He couldn't come for some reason, but even he thought it was getting too heavyweight. Mm-hmm. And people wanted to talk about getting processes that really worked, were smaller, were team-based, things they knew worked well. And so Uncle Bob invited a bunch of people, 17 of us showed up, to just talk about what we were doing. The first day we did, and had a lot of discussion and a lot of debate about what we should do, what we shouldn't do, and came away with the feeling that we didn't have really good agreement about anything. There were a lot of big egos in the room with strong opinions.
Yes.
So the next day, about mid-morning, Martin Fowler actually went up to the whiteboard. That's the picture on the Agile Manifesto site. What you're seeing is him at the whiteboard at that hour, about 10 o'clock, saying, guys, we must agree on something. If there's anything we can agree on, we should write it down.
That's the good thing about a time box, right?
Yeah.
You felt the pressure of the time box. We got to get something done. Yeah.
And we wrote down those 4 bullets in about an hour. Spent a little time actually adding the 12 or 15 things, that were important. But the 4 bullets were the basics. That only took an hour. And then we went back to arguing and debating for the rest of the time. And people said, it felt like, we put a note in a bottle and we threw it in the ocean and everybody read it.
Are you surprised? Honestly, are you surprised now, like looking back in time, what kind of impact that meeting had on the industry?
I always felt that Scrum was going to continue to grow. It worked. It was going to explode. I know that though some of the people at that meeting say it completely changed their life and their practice. That they felt they were in this really small space, not a lot of interest, and all of a sudden it blew up. It certainly has changed the life of everybody that signed that manifesto, for sure, as well as the life of many people all over the planet. So, it's just one of those things. You get lucky sometimes.
Yeah. Talking about evolution of things, and you guys are going back and you meet again, and let's see what just happens, the intentions of meeting. Who knows, perhaps somebody else goes to the whiteboard.
There's no intention at this meeting. It's convening to say, what do we think today? We'll see what happens.
So, talking about evolution of things, like Scrum. I mean, Scrum has... it's a wonderful framework. I'm teaching it, you're teaching it, lots of courses worldwide, some of the Scrum Training Institute, for example, promoting these courses. Where's the journey going for Scrum? Is it just going to stay as it is?
I wrote a paper in 2005 that was published at the Big Agile Conference. It was called The Future of Scrum. And it described what we were doing at PatientKeeper at the time, which was basically every sprint was a release, and every sprint was targeted towards a specific customer or partner. And these sprints were run in parallel, and we were multiplexing sprints through teams. We had an automated system that could actually manage this very high level of complexity. And at the time, that set of teams, there were about 6 teams, was one of the highest performing scrums in the world. People really had wildly different opinions about that paper. A lot of people said, that's not Scrum at all. Ken Schwaber said, I don't know what it is, but it's a competitive monster. It eats anything in its way. But basically what it was doing was optimizing Scrum to maximize the benefit to the customer. And it was driven by the CEO who said, the only thing that matters to me is customers live and paying. And I would like to see that at the end of every sprint. Why can't I have that? And the developers said, well, it's impossible by doing anything we've ever done. So he said the same thing they say at Toyota. Well, try something different. And to my amazement, the team did. It took them about 2 years to remove enough impediments so that they could deploy in a big hospital system on the last day of a sprint. It's a huge effort. And it requires actually to get the hospital project team on the sprint team and doing acceptance testing while we're doing development every step of the way.
Oh, wow.
Since then, there are many companies that have gone to a release at the end of every sprint, but I haven't seen anybody try to deal with the complexity of PatientKeeper. PatientKeeper itself, after our product owner left, after I left, after our VP of engineering left, somewhat due to its growth, it was growing tremendously, doubling in size. So the expansion and the architecture of the Scrum implementation had to change with that growth. And at the time, they brought in a new VP of engineering that did not have Scrum experience. And so the implementation blew up, and they fell back into waterfall 6-month releases.
So the Scrum, so to speak, is not the same Scrum.
So the message is, if you get a really high-performing Scrum, you need to have people that really know how to do this. Tuning it, removing impediments, being able to adjust it as the context changes. And if you lose that critical mass of experience on the team, bad things happen. I mean, what else is new?
Yeah. So what I've noticed actually in the Scrum framework, when you pointed it out today, you put it basically in front of me again. Was the topic, for example, the retrospective, as like this thing is really getting more emphasis in the Scrum framework. It was always there, but it's getting more attention these days of process improvement as a real piece of adaptation and inspection. Is it going to be like formal, like you got to do retrospectives? Is retrospectives going to be elevated? Are there any other pieces in Scrum which will be perhaps revised or recommended? For example, I'm just throwing this out, like we're talking more and more about 2-week sprints rather than 4-week sprints, whereas like 10 years ago, 4-week sprints were quite common.
Well, the latest version 1 analysis of Agile worldwide, I think they had over 4,000 participants in the survey, shows that I think it's almost 70% of the Scrum, 60 to 70% of the Scrum sprints are 2-week sprints today.
Okay. And
everything else is way less than that, down around the order of 10%. So the market has spoken that 2 weeks is the sweet spot. As far as Scrum itself, Ken Schwaber and I have, focused on keeping the Scrum guide clear about the Scrum framework. And the retrospective is in there. One of the things that more and more people are saying is absolutely necessary to do is product grooming sessions. And typically every week, getting together with the product owner and staging that backlog. If you don't do it, you don't get a good kickoff to the next sprint.
It is mentioned in the Scrum Guide, right? But it's like even with a recommendation of 10% of your time being dedicated to grooming, but it's not a part of the ceremony. It's not
a formal meeting defined in the Scrum Guide. And I've talked to Ken about that maybe we've got to have a formal meeting. He feels that the 10% is in there, the recommendation to do grooming is in there. Maybe that's enough for right now. But I can tell you, it's just like the retrospective wasn't separate, but everybody kept on bringing it up. It's so important. It needs attention. We need to give it focus.
It's evolving. I think it's put to test. It's put into practice. And as you said, the market speaks and responds. We're learning from that. But we're not blowing up the Scrum Guide. It's a very relatively short.
The thing that is really, I think the Scrum Guide has grown a little bit, but nowhere near as much as best practices around Scrum. I mean, we know that the Scrum board really works. For most people, user stories really work. And points instead of hours absolutely works. Yet there's still a huge debate in the community. People have trouble getting hours out of their mind. But points, velocity, the venture group I'm working with, one of the major reasons they adopted Scrum for everything was they can finally measure production. That means they can finally get the dates that are predictable. And then finally they can get more predictable return on their investment. So,
you mentioned earlier the rational unified process as an example, and that process had its peak at one time. I published about the RUP as well, and as a process back in the early 2000s. Scrum doesn't have that. Scrum doesn't seem to. It peaks all the time. It peaks now. Where does it end?
It seems, I keep thinking, maybe it's going to peak, but then I was just telling my wife yesterday. My schedule was bad last year, but it's getting worse this year.
we don't see an end. I think it's real. I think it's going to stick.
I think basically that just implementing a few simple things with Scrum will give you more traction, and it's and the market is more and more competitive, and it's not. It used to be there was just outsourcing, but now there are really good startups in Europe, in Asia. I mean, there's a guy that was in Boston training, and he said, I'm working for a big company right now, but my goal is to go back to India and start up a company that's going to compete with your startups in Boston. That's what he's doing. People all over the world are doing that. So unless you're getting better every day in your software business, somebody's going to take that away from you. And everybody feels that. The telecoms are really interesting because, we've had a couple of major telecoms completely go out of existence. Every telecom knows that the price of a phone call is going to go to zero. We know that virtually every telecom has big Scrum implementations.
Mm-hmm.
Skype has 1 billion customers. They're looking for 2 billion. They don't see why there would be any other phone company other than Skype on the planet.
Wow.
So
Confidence.
If getting better is not enough motivation in and of itself, fear, uncertainty, and doubt about whether you're going to be alive tomorrow might get you up to dime.
It's a measurable goal, right?
Yeah, right.
Talking about Scrum, I'm just curious, if you had to take a wild guess, how many Scrum Masters went through your training over the last years? I mean, you're so busy, you're traveling around the world.
Yeah, I know there are over 100,000 people that have just been certified by the Scrum Alliance, and there are other people doing trainings as well.
Mm-hmm.
And even though some of them may not be active in Scrum now, because there are so many that are uncounted, I think that's a reasonable number. There's 100,000 teams out there that are serious about doing Scrum that we probably know about, and there's probably more that aren't. And that number is continually increasing every year. The last time I checked, there was somewhere between 80 and 90 countries with Scrum implementations. Mm-hmm. And so you can go anywhere in the world. And there's been two really amazing things to me about Scrum I never would have expected. Number one, it works in every culture. Cultures have different kind of characteristics.
Yes.
So it generates different problems. But for some reason, this team process is humanity in action, so it works if you're a human being. The other thing is scalability. Everybody said in the early days Agile doesn't scale, but we got these huge. You had 3,000 people at AOL, and there are some companies that have close to that number working on a single product, and they don't see any limit to the scalability of Scrum. It works at any scale.
Okay.
So.
Well, I do want to ask you a question here at the end. We're coming to the end of this podcast, and we do need to go to Agile New York City. You're in conferences, you speak at conferences, you publish papers, you speak a lot, you teach a lot. Are you thinking about writing a book, putting all your experiences into a book? We don't see you publishing books around Scrum.
There are 2 books that are ongoing now. One is I'm helping reframe a book in English called The Power of Scrum that's already published in the Netherlands and in France, and I think in Germany. And it's a novel about Scrum, about a CTO of a consulting company that has a big project and the customer is about to shoot him. And out of desperation, he's implementing Scrum. And it has all the characteristics of a novel, emotion, tension. As we're doing it, it's just getting better and better. My son, who's a producer at National Public Radio, is a writer, and he's helping with it. And he's putting in all the good writing novelist kind of experience in that. So that's a really fascinating book that's going to be done this month. The other thing is a Scrum handbook, a basic Scrum handbook. That's actually been done for about a year. I've been passing it out to people in courses. We're going to publish that as a book. We want to go through a revision to really tune that up. It'll be almost a second edition, and then get it into publisher. Okay, wonderful. I didn't know about that. Thank you for sharing this. That's very valuable. And for everybody out there listening to this right now, that there are some books coming down at the pipe. Thank you, Jeff. Thanks for your time. Yeah. I enjoyed it very much. Good talking to you. Thank you. And let's go to Agile New York City. Yeah. Thank you so much. Okay. Thank you for listening to Agile.FM, the radio for the Agile community. I'm your host, Joe Krebs. If you're interested in more programming and additional podcasts, please go to www.agile.fm. Talk to you soon.